Hi, this is Gail Sokol. On today's show, we're going to talk about how to frost a two-layer cake.
Welcome to Baking Radio. Learn the art and science of baking with author, educator, and award-winning chef, Gail Sokol. Whether you've been baking your whole life or you're brand new to the world of baking and you're looking to build your confidence and learn new skills in the kitchen, you're in the right place. This is Baking Radio.
So today we're going to talk about how to frost a two-layer cake, or any cake for that matter. Before we get started on how to frost a two-layer cake, or any cake for that matter, I really want to talk first about why. Why do we frost a cake? Why? Think about it. Frostings, icings. Why do we love them so much? Why do we put them on all of our cakes? They can be a wonderful complement to any cake. They add moisture. They add great flavor. And if you look at the baking science of it, they prevent staling. The next reason why I love to frost a cake, eye appeal. I love a cake that looks like $1,000,000. When I see a plain, unadorned cake, it's like, I don't know. It looks okay, even if it's chocolate, because I love chocolate. It's sort of the plain Jane. It's unadorned. It's really not something exciting to me. It doesn't shout out to me, eat me. But if you spread it with frosting, I want it. I want to be there. I want to cut a piece. I want to cut a hunk of it. And I think most people feel the same way. The other thing is, frostings can hide imperfections, mishaps, even cover a misshapen cake. And I'm not implying that we're making a bad quality cake or a cake that is not good. I'm saying if something is not perfect, and I'm a perfectionist, so I like my cakes to look drop dead gorgeous. And if they don't look perfect and level, it upsets me as a baker. I want them to be as humanly perfect as possible. And I am not perfect, nor do I intend to be, nor do I want your cakes or my cakes to look like they came from a machine. It's very important that my cakes look like a human hand touched them, because they were made with love and they were made by somebody who cares. And that to me means more than any store-bought cake or boxed cake that I could make. And I think you feel the same way. So frostings can hide a cake maybe that didn't rise perfectly. Maybe it sank a little in the middle. And some cakes actually do this. In the recipe, they'll say the center of the cake may drop and not be as high as the sides. That's okay. So you fill it with a little extra frosting when you frost it. It's not a big deal. Or maybe when you were taking the cake out and it came out perfectly, a few extra crumbs came out and sort of you by accident gouged out a little piece on the side. So we'll cover it with frosting, right? And you can make that cake look perfect just by covering it with some frosting, or even making a special filling and then frosting the top of the cake with the frosting. So there are many different things that you can do to cover cakes. And that's why we frost cakes. But I think the most important reason is we love the way the frostings taste in combination with the cake, right? You got that tender, light crumb of that cake, and then you have that sweet creaminess from that frosting. And together, it's like peanut butter and jelly. It's like salt and pepper. It just goes together so well. You can't picture one without the other. And a big glass of chocolate milk or white milk or any type of milk or a hot cup of coffee, that to me is dessert. And that's delicious. Now I want to talk technique, how to frost a two-layer cake. And go ahead and bake your cake. Let it cool. And remember, it's got to be barely warm when you take it out of the cake pan. And then once it comes out of the cake pan, you must let it cool down to room temperature. It must be cooled. All right. I'm repeating it again and again and again. You're going to go to sleep at night hearing me say this. It's very important or your frosting will melt and it will cause your cake layers to shift. And we don't want that. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you have some place to put your cake. Once it's frosted and you've built it up, because you've got 2 layers, you can actually serve it on something. And it should be either a serving platter. I had a student actually use what's known as a turntable, and we have those in the culinary school where I teach. And turntables are wonderful. They're actually tables that are footed. They're a little bit higher. They stand on a stand, and you can actually put your cake on them and rotate them as you're frosting them. So it's really very, very great way to sort of get a smooth side to your cake. So you want to get your cake onto either a cardboard cake circle or a serving platter that you are happy with. That is a little bit bigger than your cake. So if you have 9-inch cakes, 9-inch diameter cakes, you might want a 12-inch cake, a serving platter, or something that will hold your cake. If you do put it on a cardboard cake circle, I usually put it on the same size as the cake. So I try to get a 9-inch cake circle, and I don't cover it with foil or anything, just leave it plain. And I take my first cake, usually I flipped it out onto a cardboard cake circle, and it's already on the cake circle. So it's ready to be put on that turntable. If you don't have a turntable, don't worry about it. Just put it on a nice area where you know you can frost your cake easily. And usually you will want to put it on a serving platter. So my student, to get back to my student, they used a turntable, but they never used a cardboard cake circle. So they put the cake, the bare cake, on the turntable. Then they frosted it. They layered it, they frosted it, and it was gorgeous. And then I said, okay, remove it from the turntable. And they said, how? There's no plate underneath. So we basically had to serve it to the class on the turntable. And if you've ever seen a turntable, some of them are they come in a plastic version, and some of them are like stainless steel, but they are not pretty. They're not a serving platter. So you want to make sure you think ahead. Where do I want to serve this cake? How do I want to do this? And then you want to take your frosting, so you have your frosting already made, and make sure your frosting is spreadable. Many frostings, when you first make them, they're very thin. They may need to be chilled. They may need to be whipped again with a mixer, with a whip, with a whisk, and lightened and fluffed up a little bit. So you really want it to be of spreading consistency, spreadable consistency. And you'll see this in a recipe too for frosting. You don't want to spread a frosting that is pourable unless you're pouring it on top of the cake and covering the cake that way with a glaze. That's a whole different story. So once you get your cake on this, this turntable, if you're using it, or on a serving platter, you will put a dollop, maybe a big tablespoonful of your frosting on top, and make sure you have enough frosting. Be sure you always have more frosting than you need for your 2-layer cake. And you want to spread it. The spreadable tool that you want to use is an offset spatula. It can also be referred to as a palette knife. So it's rounded at the tip. It's a long, rounded, dull metal knife. And it's got a little bend in it if it's an offset. It's got a little kink in it. Some of them are not offset, so they're straight. But the ones that are offset are so much easier to spread frosting with. Make sure you get one that's offset. You can get into cracks and crevices of a cake, not to mention smoothing the sides as well. If you've ever seen anybody actually doing drywall, building a house, and spreading spackle, it's very similar. They have a similar tool, only a palette knife is a little bit more round. I imagine in my mind, anyone doing drywall and spackling would actually be a very natural born cake froster because they just got those moves down. And it's something you have to practice. I remember practicing frosting a cake pan with shortening, just a vegetable shortening, and just smearing that vegetable shortening all over that cake pan just to make sure I got it smooth. And that was sort of a practice thing. Of course, I didn't eat it, but it's something I wanted to practice. So once you get that big dollop of frosting, you're going to spread it to the edges with that palette knife all the way to the edges of the cake. And then you're going to get your second layer, which is hopefully on another cardboard cake circle or on another small plate, and you're going to gently flip it over. Don't lift it up. This is where cakes break, especially cakes that are using the creaming method of mixing, or basically any other method of mixing. They're very tender. So if you lift it up, it's going to crack and it's going to break. And then we got a major issue of patchwork, which we can do, but we don't want to get into that. So once you flip your cake gently, very gently on top of the frosting, you may have to make adjustments. It might not be totally centered. So you want to make sure that that top layer is centered the way the bottom layer is and that frosting. Now, some of the frosting may ooze over the side. This is fine. And after this, you're going to put more frosting on top of the cake. The biggest thing is you don't want to mix the crumbs of the cake in with the frosting. I really don't want to see crumbs that are mixed in with like white frosting, or worse, a dark chocolate cake frosted with a white buttercream frosting, and it's got little specks because the person frosting it didn't put enough frosting and some of the crumbs got in. And there will be cake crumbs. After all, it's a cake. It's a cake. So you expect it. So what you do to counteract that is put enough frosting over it that when you spread it, that little bit of crumb will be on the next to the cake and not on the surface of the cake. Now you want to spread. So you've got this big dollop of frosting on the top of the cake. Your cake is filled. And now you're going to take your offset spatula and you're going to drag some of the frosting over the edge, almost like you're pushing it off the edge of a cliff. But as it starts falling very slowly, you're going to guide it. It's very important that you guide it using the rounded part of the blade facing down to the center of the earth, like down at the table. And this is where you will spread and slowly take your turntable and move it, rotate it very slowly so you can keep up as you frost with one hand and turn with the other. You'll keep doing this until you run out of frosting, and then you'll add more frosting. And keep doing that until the 360 degrees of the cake are completely covered and your top of your cake is covered. And at this point, you are done. You have frosted your cake. There's no extra embellishments. It's perfectly frosted, but we can do other things with that cake. We could make more frosting. We could make a different type of frosting. And then we could go nuts and use a pastry tip and a pastry bag and pipe bits of rosettes all around the top of the cake. Or maybe decorate the top of the cake with nuts. Or maybe grate some chocolate and put it on top. The sky's the limit. I could go on and on about how many different ways you could just bring this cake to the next level. So today we learned how to frost a 2-layer cake and why we frost cakes in general. I really appreciate you listening. We learned a lot, and there's really a lot more to learn about cake frosting and how to frost a cake. It's really only the tip of the iceberg. But if you have any questions or concerns, I would love to answer them and see if I could answer some of them on the air. Go to bakingradio.com. Next week, I'm going to give you my best French vanilla buttercream recipe, and it's going to be step by step. You're not going to want to miss it.